Hello, everybody. Welcome to Lunch and Lore. I am Tormented by Gnomes. Joining me is the co-creator of the world of Anacra, NinjaManMat. Matt, how's your Friday treating you?
It's a Friday and I'm awake, but we're good.
Couldn't have said it better myself. All right. So on today's episode, we are talking about the One Flesh. We've sort of been working our way through some of the cosmic keystones of the universe. Let me just make sure. Yeah, okay. And we've been talking a lot about the firmament and how the Four Kingdoms work together. We talked about the Celestials, how they stand watch at the edge of the night sky to make sure that nothing invades the Four Kingdoms. Well, why are they there? They're there largely because of the One Flesh. So I think we're going to start, yes, all hail NinjaManMat and his fancy new green screen as his production values continue to increase.
Woo.
So first off, let's talk about what the One Flesh is, right? Like, where did it come from? First off, I'm going to go out there and say that unless you have a cool idea that I haven't thought of, Matt, I don't know where it comes from. All I know is it comes from somewhere in the hungry dark. It's from space.
Exactly. It's just, gosh, it could be from anything. It could be from Call of Cthulhu for all we know.
Yeah,
I mean, it's out there doing its thing and now it's here.
It could have been a freaking Tyranid from Warhammer 40k.
It could have been. It really could have been.
Right? That's one of the things about Anacra is that sometimes, especially for things that come from the Hungry Dark, you could tell a story about the origins of these things, like the origins of some of the Infernals in whatever world they come from, or the spacefaring gnomes that I insist dwell among us, blending into our societies, infiltrating us every day. In the game, in the game, of course.
Yeah, sure, in the game, yeah.
But a lot of times we have things in the world where the origins are shrouded in mystery, and we like it that way. It's more ominous. You can use your imagination, and any DM who's running a game in Anacra can always say, "Yeah, I'm going to tell the story of where the One Flesh came from." But for our purposes, it is a massive life form that feeds on life energy. But it doesn't just, I will drain your life energy. It also feeds on like biomass. So it eats meat. It eats plants. It requires nutrition to grow. And I don't know exactly what it looks like. I will say that the closest thing I have for inspiration is Lavos from Chrono Trigger.
Do you have a link for that we can drop in?
I'll see if I can pull one up. It's not so much about the visuals, right? Lavos is this thing that plummeted to our planet millions of years ago and like burrowed into the core and has been living there the entire time. And I know it's got a beak, but visually, when I think of the One Flesh, I think of just this.
We always describe it as a giant space flea from nowhere. That's one of the things that we always use to talk about it, how it was drawn to the scent of blood when the demons were sundered and the moon was made out of the bones and blood of them. That was one of the things that attracted it. And like how you described, it's this mass that, yes, it consumes and it also grows. It's almost like you could kind of consider like a cancer monster. Like it replicates at an alarming rate. It has this weird kind of hive mind where it's not exactly like, oh yeah, there's a queen and then a bunch of workers and stuff like that, but it's everything that's connected to this. Even if there are beings that separate away from it, they're all kinds of connected in a way.
It's like the biomass of the One Flesh has its own resonant frequency that harmonizes with certain types of psychic waves. So anything made of that biomass type, that type of meat, will just every single cell in its body is in some low-level telepathic communication with other creatures with the same type of DNA.
Exactly. A good way to describe the One Flesh, if you're comparing, the actual lore of Anacra to like D&D game statistics, we're talking like aberrations. These are going to be things like aboliths, mind flayers, anything that has a connection with that oopy goopy eldritch stuff. Like if you're a warlock that connects to the One Flesh, you're looking at the Great Old One, things like that.
And I tend to, so it's obviously our stand-in where if you want your Lovecraftian style, space horror style monsters, it's usually going to be connected to the One Flesh. But I think it's more in line with actual classic Cthulhu than the direction people often take Cthulhu. People often take Cthulhu in a more extra dimensional sense, where there's this idea that looking at Cthulhu, because Cthulhu and Cthulhuid style, mythos creatures, they break the laws of reality, they break the laws of physics, and our brains literally cannot comprehend them. There's less of that with the One Flesh. Not to say there's none of that, but the emphasis when it comes to the One Flesh is less about being incomprehensible. It's one of those things where if somebody tells you 1,000 people died, you'd go, oh, that's bad, 1,000 people died, and you think you can comprehend that. But if you are actually in a situation where 1,000 people die, which is a real thing that happens, it's not an extra dimensional phenomenon, a real thing that happens, but it's horrifying and it can break your brain. It's the same thing as like, oh, we've been told that a T-Rex was this big. Wow, that's amazing. And you can comprehend that. But if you actually found yourself face to face with one,
that's the size of your hand in your home, you freak out and lose all sorts of faculty. You're
exactly.
Like, oh my God, that's a big spider. And if you freak out over a big spider, imagine if you literally saw a 40-ton Tyrannosaurus Rex barreling down on you,
Right. It's the difference between understanding something and experiencing something. The One Flesh is a meteor-sized parasite from space that's this ball of flibbering flesh with tentacles and proboscis. I tend to think of it less squiddy and more insectoid, and I think of fleas and mosquitoes especially, and just like constant blind mouths just going desperately mouthing at the air for more food.
I've got a yes but counter for you. I feel like it's some kind of hybrid. Again, not just saying straight up like, oh yeah, it's a squid, it's Cthulhu. But like you said, it has this, like you said, these feelers, these antennae, these mandibles. But I think rather than having like how like you'll see like an ooze tentacle monster with gibbering maws all over the place. I feel like it's very similar, except instead of oozing gibbering maw, you have this carapace with these rips and tears, and these rips and tears heal, those healed holes will now become like new mandibles and maws and stuff.
Like it's constantly regenerating and tearing, and instead of scabs, it gets like new sucker mouths.
Exactly. And so
that's
what
nasty.
you have is that the ooze in essence isn't just that, oh, it's this amorphous thing. No, I think that it has like the carapace like you're describing, but like we said, when it consumes, it replicates so fast that it's constantly shearing and tearing apart its carapace and exoskeleton, and anything that gets like if it's rehealing and closing off, anything that's trapped outside of it becomes a new entity. It will spring forward, and that's where you'll get things like ooze. The extra blood that's carried over from these things could become some kind of obelisk or whatnot. That weird ooze like thing that like mimics people. And
an ooblex. Wait, is that an ooblex?
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah.
But you'll have things like that, things that are horrific, but like you said, not, oh God, it shattered my mind horrific. Now, of course, if you want to play with the sanity rules, that's absolutely something you can do. But just in general, like you said, it's horrific and it's terrifying, and it may literally cause people to become fearful and afraid, but it wouldn't be anything more than like a dragon fear I would compare it to.
Yeah, it's less deep fundamental wrongness. There is a sense of wrongness we get in ourselves when we encounter like a centipede or something, where your body says danger, and your skin crawls in convulsion, but that's a natural instinct designed to protect you from getting poisoned by a bug.
Yes.
The One Flesh is more of that, just turned up to a million. Question from chat: does the One Flesh have sentience and a larger agenda within the cosmos, or is it behaving on instinct and just wants to consume things? So my understanding of the One Flesh is that it is utterly alien. It's like you can have a conversation with Uzhul the Destroyer or Nephastus Herald of Despair. I would advise against it, but those are like people, entities that you can converse with.
Those are personalities, yes.
Right, exactly. The One Flesh, like if there's a mind there, which there's mental activity there for sure, but it's not a mind the way that we would consider a mind. And it's capable of interacting with, so the way that I would run, say, mind flayers, right, is that mind flayers are offshoots of the one flesh. You could easily say mind flayers come from the Hungry Dark, and they're the same mind flayers that conquered the D&D universe long ago. If you want to keep that lore, that would still totally work. But if I was to run mind flayers in Anacra, they'd be, you know, a specific offshoot of the one flesh. They're definitely sentient. They have these elder brains that are also definitely sentient, but they're also unconsciously in tune with the one flesh and its directives. But it's not something where it's like, you know, the overmind says, awaken my child and embrace the glory. It's more just like urges that they get. Go ahead, Matt.
I was going to just absolutely tack on what you were saying. In my brain of brains, I feel like the one flesh itself, like you said, is this very kind of like some guy was suggesting in his question, is a more primal or like animalistic thing. Like it does, like, yeah, it has sentience, but not in the same regard that we do. I feel like once, because, you know, generally mind flayers are created by the elder brain, inserts that little tadpole inside of a humanoid creature, and then boom, after a while, it's now a mind flayer. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like the one flesh is very similar. There are little, whether
Mm.
whether they could be like little spores or parasites or whatever it is, there are creatures that the one flesh gets its mitts on, implants itself within, and then transforms. Those creatures have far more, in my opinion, sentience than it's a malformed and modified sentience with different wants and needs and restrictions
Mm-hmm.
than the flesh itself. But you know, like you'll see, like in, for instance, in the movie Independence Day, when the aliens end up wrapping their tentacles around that scientist's neck and start speaking through him. I feel like it's kind of in a way similar to that. Like in their own regard, it would be so incredibly difficult, if not nearly impossible, to literally have a humanoid person speak with the one flesh. But if they
Mm-hmm.
either used something as a puppet or then created something that was a hybrid of itself and a humanoid creature, then you would have something that has kind of this weird in between that weird instinctual just need to keep consuming and growing, and then whatever wants and requirements that mind flayers or their ilk tend to have. We had also talked about, without moving too far away from here, mate, we had talked about the, oh god, I forget what the specific name was, but rust dwarves. You remember rust dwarves?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
We had talked about how a lot of these dwarves, and again, were very similar to kind of Durger for us, but with some modifications. And one of the ideas we had for them was that these creatures ended up making some kind of a pact with the one flesh, and some of their people allowed themselves to be like kind of like implanted, but not fully transformed. Like they were changed,
Infused.
infused exactly with the power of the one flesh without actually fully giving themselves over to it.
I think the best way to describe the one flesh, one, nobody on Anacra truly understands it. Not even the sovereigns truly understand it. But I think the best way to describe it would be like a meta instinct. The one flesh is, so you've got all these aberrations that are capable of sentience, but their unconscious mind, their instinct, is the one flesh. It's like they tap into the one flesh for all their unconscious mind, and then their sentience is a layer on an independent layer on top of that. But just like humans are still largely driven by instinct and unconscious that shapes us in ways we don't truly understand, it's as if these creatures don't have their own unconscious. Their unconscious is just an aspect of the one flesh. So it in and of itself is not intelligent or sentient, and yet it drives its offspring to find ways to help it, even if it doesn't in direct contact. Also, before you go, and I'm going to let you go in just a sec, chat brought up a grave mind comparison. I very much like that, except less personality.
Yes,
But
exactly. I think that's the big kicker, is this being would not really have a personality. And like you said, the sentience that it imparts on these creatures, or at least warping their sentience, is less like a, hey, I really want this. I think in a way, the reason that the actual one flesh doesn't have such a thing is that it's kind of inconsequential to its prime directive. Its
mm-hmm,
main thing is just consume, grow, and rinse, repeat, keep doing its thing.
mm-hmm.
I think that the sentience that's imparted on these other creatures, or this different drive they have, is just a means to an end
Right,
for
it's
that.
like an evolutionary mechanism. It evolves sentience in other creatures in order to fulfill. It's almost like a virus, right?
Yes.
It's a lot like a virus. Now, here's what I am going to say. Does it have sentience? No. Does it have a larger agenda within the cosmos aside from grow, eat, and
Maybe.
multiply? It itself, probably not. Could the one flesh be part of something larger that does have its own sentience? Woo!
say it's very likely that the one flesh, how you know how we described that the little pieces that fall off of the one flesh end up becoming these smaller aberrant creatures. It's
Mm-hmm.
very likely that this giant space through the one flesh that we know of was either a parasite or a piece that fell off of the much larger hole that's
Mm-hmm.
out there just floating around in the hungry dark.
Exactly. And maybe that creature is a reality altering, mind consuming Cthulhuoid type thing.
Yeah.
Who knows? All right. So we've talked a lot about what it is. Let's talk a little bit about how it got here. We've touched on this in other episodes, but I like doing everything in the same episode. So if somebody just comes to consume this particular piece of content, they'll be up to speed on everything.
All connects.
So when we talk about the blood of the earth, we are both literally talking about the blood that flowed through Erecura's avatar, which was killed by Uzhul, discorporating Erecura, the Sovereign of Stone. We are also talking about a physical substance. It's a physical, metaphysical substance. It's tied into the element of earth, but it's also heavily connected to positive energy. It's almost a physical form of vital energy. And it's symbolically poured into the veins of every new creature when they're born. It's like if you tear a creature apart, you're not going to find it, but in blood there is this vital energy that exists, and there's this idea that somewhere there's a wellspring where that vital energy is concentrated. So, one sec. I keep dropping this thing that I'm fiddling with mindlessly because my unconscious is actually an aspect of the one flesh, and I'm just a parasite puppet, like all of us. But anyways, so Uzhul tricked the fire giants into forging, the ultimate sword. And they took the actual physical manifestations of these wells of lifeblood, which was blood, like it was actually had the chemical constitution of blood, although it was also super infused with life energy. And they distilled the iron from it, which took an outrageous amount of blood to get that much iron out of it, turned it into a sword. That is the sword that Uzhul was able to use to kill Erecura. And when he stabbed her, the lifeblood of the earth gushed forth. And because Erecura was vital to the mechanisms of the Four Kingdoms, it caused sort of a leak of vital energy in the cosmos. And simultaneously, because Erecura and the Four Sovereigns are the ones who made the firmament, the way that the Four Kingdoms locked together to protect Anacra, her death loosened the gaps. They sort of began to jiggle, right? If you imagine it as this metal sphere, it sort of loosened them, so now it's squeaking and rattling. So the smell of this spilled lifeblood leaked out into the hungry dark. And the one flesh was drifting. It's believed that this particular giant space fleet from nowhere was drifting through the cosmos when it smelled that blood and followed it to its source, which is why it took a couple hundred years after the death of Erecura for the one flesh to arrive. Like by the time it arrived, Romius had already locked down the demonic Imperium. He'd already altered the Emerald Tablets, but the firmament had not been repaired. In fact, it's not really possible to repair it to its original non-squeaky shape.
No.
So the one flesh follows that smell, squeezes through the firmament. It's believed that the one flesh was heavily deformed and took some damage in that process, even though it is nice and jiggly and able to make its way through. Squeezes its way through the firmament. If you imagine, if you looked up at the night sky or the sky, you'd literally see just like these flibbering tendrils and segmented limbs and this, mosquito proboscis and just squeezing and wriggling out of nowhere until it made its way through and it dropped. And its goal was to burrow into the world, get to those wells of blood, and just drink it up so it could grow to an immense size, probably spawn, use this area in order to breed and multiply and, eat everything on it.
Kind of like imagine like a super just mega chunky Godzilla with proboscises and stuff just falling out of the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And then coming to the rescue, we had Liban, Sovereign of the Seas, literally just tear a continent from the earth and just lay this thing to waste.
I don't know if we've had a couple different ideas about where that chunk of earth was. I always had this idea that it was part of one of the other four continents, but I don't remember if we decided where it was.
So what? Again, it's kind of come and gone. But my thought was there's this little dip between the northern continent and southern continent in the east, and
Hmm.
that it was a portion. So it's the southwest of the Connacht Vale, just behind where Lytiri was. That chunk along the bay there, and going
Hmm.
down towards the depths of Brontha. I believe that was where they had torn it from. Because when you look at the continent of Tamrian, it's a large collection of things. A lot of it is very similar to the forests of the Northern Kingdoms. There's a lot of really tall mountains, kind of similar to the peaks near El Terrell, or what separates Alamo Cartho. And there's also some plains and deserts, kind of similar to a lot of the plain lands between the two continents, and then even into Brontha and the Marquise lands. To the south, so I feel like that like there was just this large coastal, like the two separate continents we have. I feel like in a way one of the reasons that it's obviously two separate continents was because a large chunk of this supercontinent was just ripped apart to
Hmm.
use as a battering ram against the Orange Blood.
And I think Liban tried their best to like grab a lot of bay, you know?
Yes,
So like
exactly.
so it was as much of it was underwater as possible, but there was at least part of it, like people lived there when this sovereign just like rips a chunk of the earth out. There were some people who lived on it, and we'll talk about them in a sec, and we'll talk about them again in more detail somewhere far down the line.
Yeah.
Liban just rips his gigantic chunk from the ocean floor and from the coast, stands there like a batter up to bat, waiting for the one flesh to get in range, and then just swings this small continent at the creature. Swings it overhand down and then crushes it to the bottom of the
Very.
ocean floor.
Yes, exactly. And I feel like, just like all other things, it's very likely that the One Flesh would have gone through, not only when they came through the firmament, but they had to go through the Sky Kingdom, very likely.
Mm.
So it's very possible that, Vinder was calling on down, hey, it's getting past me. I need you to
We
do
got a
something about
2319.
it. 2319. Yeah,
Like
exactly.
in my head canon, I don't know if we ever fully discussed this. Vinder was just throwing thunderbolts at the thing the whole time. As soon as it appeared, like just wriggling out of the sky itself. So it got blasted quite a bit, which is good, but also bad because bits and pieces of it broke off.
That's what I
Uh,
was going to say. That's where all the other aberrations came from. They got scattered across the world from it crushing its way through the firmament and then getting just riddled with thunderbolts. It exploded out all over the
mhm.
place. So now you have these creatures literally littering. They usually stay. They burrowed down deep and they're in the Underdark. They're sequestered away, and you only see them every so often, but they are lingering and growing everywhere.
Mhm. Also, in Arc 2 of, was it Arc 2? Yeah, it was Arc 2
I
of
think it was
Quest for
like
the
two.
Book of Dawn. They
Yeah.
visited the Sky Kingdom, and there is this
Yeah.
swamp in the Sky Kingdom, the morass, and
Ras.
it's
Yep.
like liquid smoke and smog and like just nasty polluted goo. It's not like there's a huge industrial age at this point in history, so where did all that come from? Pieces of the one flesh that broke off when it got smote by Vindor landed, and those became the seeds of the morass.
Yes. Also, again, and I don't want to go too far away from this topic, but I feel like one of the, like how we just mentioned, a lot of the aberrant forms that had broken away from the one flesh that were
Mhm.
scattered across the worlds, burrowing down deep into the earth. I feel like the dwarves and the Dolgulfar would be like just supreme enemies of the one flesh, since it basically invaded what is their normal realm.
We should do a whole thing on elves.
Oh yeah.
We should 100% do a thing on elves.
Especially considering that the Dolgulfar, known as Drow in other settings, are very different in Anacra.
And they have
And
not appeared at all in Casters and Castles.
no, they have not. They absolutely have not.
We've had the Aurai, we've had the Holdra, Lisha's a Holdra. We've had the Alfar, especially in an episode of Tales from the Golden Bough. But we have
The
not had
Triton.
the Tritons, but we have not had the Dolk Alfar. So,
We haven't had either, too.
hmm.
We haven't had the Woad Elves, the Shylag. That's another
That's
cool.
true. That's true. Partially because they mostly dwell in the West. But yeah, we
Yeah.
should 100% do a whole series on them. All right.
I feel like there's options for them to be just about anywhere.
Yeah. Well, that's the mostly, right? The most famous, largest culture of shy-leg woad elves is in the west, but that doesn't preclude the existence of shy-leg in the east. All right.
For those who playing at home, shy-leg are basically just like wood elves. If they were like, whoa, man, yeah, those are wood elves. Those are some serious wood elves.
Literally wood elves.
Like if Galadriel and Treebeard got together and said, "Hey, what if wood elves? Like, what if real wood elves? Like elves made of wood? Like that's what we're looking at."
Yep. I think they're neat.
They are amazing. They're one of my favorite archetypes of a race that we've ever come up with, and I love that ancestry, and I'm looking forward to bringing it more into the fold.
Yes. All right. So Liban smacks the crap out of the one flesh. Bits and pieces of it break off and scatter throughout the ocean, releasing the Kraken, creating all sorts of like sea monsters. So you've got the Sky Kingdom is inhabited.
Literally releasing the Kraken.
Literally releasing the Kraken. The Sky Kingdom aberrations are descendants from when the one flesh was smote by Vindur. The ocean-dwelling aberrations, of which there are quite a lot. There's a lot of aberration sea monsters in our world, all sorts of them. And they're mostly descended from bits and pieces that broke off when the one flesh was smote by Liban, and then it was ground and crushed underneath the continent of Tamrian, and that's where a lot of them burrowed into the earth. Like they come from other sources as well, but those are the three primary spawnings of the one flesh. So
speaking of Tamrian, I don't know how much we're going to get into Tamrian today. I know I want to make sure we focus on the one flesh, but just since it's been brought up in a couple of our streams before, Tamrian, as you can imagine, considering it literally has the one flesh buried beneath the very core of its being, it's not a fun place. If you wanted to run a very Call of Cthulhu style game within Anacra, that would be the locale you want to choose. That is the game where you are going to be having people make sanity checks, worry about madness. That is about as close as you can get to that kind of eldritch horror sense that you're looking for. The people that are there are very tough and hard. They have to deal with not just the actual aberrations, but the very wildlife and monsters of that world have been tainted and changed, not just by the influence of the one flesh, but by the influence of Liban themselves. It's a very powerful place, and it's one of those like only the strong survive there, because everything is tough, from the flora, the fauna, and the actual people that inhabit it, and the monsters that lurk there as well.
It's basically misty, alpine, haunted Cthulhu Australia.
That's a really good way of putting it. Everything there will kill you, and you're going to be cold the whole time, cold and damp. Yeah, actually, it's pretty much, like you said, really cold and really humid Australia.
And the wildlife is slightly more hostile than real, just a hair more hostile,
barely,
than real Australia. Yeah,
just because bugbears don't actually exist in real life. So.
All right, so the one flesh gets smote. It spawns all these offshoots. The offshoots of the one flesh are working towards maybe not a grand plan. They may not be like it's not like the one flesh has a conspiracy board connected with red string explaining how it's going to take over the world. But all aberrations are connected to the one flesh. Their unconscious mind is connected to the one flesh, and therefore they act subconsciously without even realizing it towards the advancement of the one flesh's goals. But before we get to those,
you said, very similar to a virus. It's not like it's a yes, I'm going to go to the liver because it sucks there, and then I'm going to head up to the brain. It's mostly just it spreads around, it does its thing, and they're all just running on autopilot. Everything, even if they have their own sentience and goals, underlyingly, subconsciously, it's all working towards one big goal. And like you said, it's less of a here's our goal and more like, if you look at the Infernals, they're like, hey, look at this cool playground, let's ruin it. The one flesh would be like, hey, look at this. Well, it would mostly be like, tasty, and this is a really nice area with a lot of good things to eat.
Eat the children.
Eat the tree.
So the one flesh arrives, it gets smote. We are now in what we call a bad time, because Erecura has been discorporated and can no longer run around doing sovereign things. Vindur was already freaked out by the Infernals arriving and is now doubly freaked out and is basically hiding in the Sky Kingdom, amassing armies, conquering things, obsessed with his own security. So he's not helping. Sin is playing SimCity with Sharon, and Sin is like the most interventionist of the sovereigns at this point, and even he is busy building his perfect, little utopia, his dystopian utopia of Sharon. So this is when Raelta steps up. But before Raelta steps up, we have a problem, because the One Flesh is still burrowing into the planet, or trying to burrow into the planet. Liban is now under Tamrian at the bottom of the ocean, wrestling with this horrific creature, locked into combat for ostensibly the rest of time, as far as anyone knows. So literally all the sovereigns are out of play. Did we ever discuss...
Extremely tied up.
Yeah, they're all super busy. Yeah, if they'd stop drawing the Sin card from the Acts of God deck, then that would probably make things easier.
Guys, I'm trying to build a society and keep the literal fabric of reality from unfolding, and you keep bringing me here to summon fire elementals. Can you just calm down now? Come on, man.
So this brings me to a question, Matt, and it's not something that I think I have. I literally am not sure about this. So let's talk about the moon at this point. We're open to the concept of multiple moons, but we think there's one called the Pearl that already existed. But the big bright moon that everyone looks up at the sky, I'll tell you what happened, but I don't know who did it anymore. I no longer know who did it. So the One Flesh arrives, Liban's holding it at bay. They need to get the lifeblood out of there. It can no longer dwell in the underworld where it belongs, because the One Flesh is going to try to burrow down there. If it burrows down there, it could burrow into the infernal kingdoms. It's just going to be a mess. So they somebody, and at this point, almost all the major players are tied up. Maybe one of the other Titans could do this. Maybe we should look at the Titan list.
Yeah, I think it's a Titan, and I think it actually is probably a Titan with connections to the other world, because we know that Koigian is the what would you say?
One of the hunt masters, one of the wild fae who dwells on the moon. One of them.
Like the steward. He's like the steward of the blood moon, effectively.
I'm gonna pull up my Titans of Anacra list and go through this. But okay, let's talk to Chad about what happened. So
I think it would make sense, by the way, if it hadn't. We already have Liban, or not Liban. Sorry, we already have Raelta as this combination of both Vinder and Liban, and they have a connection to both the sky and the water. And like we talked about, their original thing was being kind of a twilight moon goddess in a way.
That's right. That's right.
So it would make sense if they already, their domain, like how we talked about Veliar, one of the other main three Titans. He's the one who pulls the sun across the sky. In the same vein, one of Rialta's many duties is doing the same thing with the moon, and it would make sense, especially with her connection to the other worlds and to the Sky Kingdom and to the mortal plane, if she was the one who kind of had all these plans, led the creation of the celestial skies, led the creation of helping draw, at least was one of the players in drawing the blood from the earth and wrapping it in the bones of the dead infernals, and then sending it off into the sky as another moon to be in charge of.
Yeah, let's first off talk about what you just said, then I have an idea that's going to play off of that. So when when Ramius altered the Emerald Tablets and dragged all the fiends into the underworld, they left behind their physical bodies, because their physical bodies were literally dragged down into the earth. And then their
souls were ripped apart, and what was left was their husks remained on the plane, while their embodiment was shunted down into the underworld.
You know how some creationists will say that dinosaur fossils were planted by Satan to deceive humanity? Well, there were a lot of demon bones, and maybe there still are some, but there were a lot of demon bones that got sucked into the ground and like deep into the ground. So for a while, there was tons of demon bones down there. But when they needed to protect the Earth's blood, they, and we're going to talk about who that was, gathered up the wellspring itself, extracted the wellspring, wrapped it in the bones of all those fiends, and yeeted it into the sky. It's sort of its own subplane, hanging above the Sky Kingdom, and it's got this connection to the other world as well. So the reason it's shiny and white is because it's made of collected demon bones, and a number of fae took up residence there. So if you go to the moon, you're not just going to be walking on clankety clankety bones. There's also this snowy forest, this eerie supernatural,
almost like an ash kind of a thing. Like the bones have been ground up over time, and almost kind of like how the winds will blow through the desert and create the sand and all that. You'll have a very similar thing where over time, just the ether winds of Anacra have just blown through and eroded the bones and kind of created this almost snowy ash, like you were describing, with these trees literally made of the knobby remains of these well, demons and devils and fiends and whatnot.
And a lot of wild hunt fae dwell there. It's said that on cold winter nights, when that moon is full, they will ride down the rays of moonlight to the mortal world to conduct their hunt. So I think Raelta is a good idea. So Raelta, we talked about her in the Celestials episode. She is the offspring of Vindur and Liban. And she was a moon. We've agreed since then that she was the original moon goddess, just like Zalar is the sun god. And there was this other moon called the Pearl that had jurisdiction over the tides. And that was sort of her shtick, opposite number to Zalar. But then when the One Flesh gained access to Anacra, that's when she decided to go over her father's head, create the Celestials, and set up the eternal sentinels across the night sky. So here's what I'm thinking. She's
kind of like the epitome of like a Twilight Moon princess, you know?
In the name of the moon, we will punish you. So here's what I'm thinking. We have two titans involved in this process. So we've got Raelta on the sky side of things with the combination of air and water. And then on the ground side of things, wrestling up all those bones, either we have Ramius contribute, or we have Alruk or Ferruk, who are the Erecura Sin titans. Alruk being like the patron of gold, and Ferruk being the god of iron in crafting and smelting and such.
I mean, it would make sense in a way if we had all three of them, if we had Ferruk and Alruk.
Those brothers combine to build the cage and send the blood, and then Raelta's the one who draws it up into the sky. I really like that.
Which actually connects our bone blood moon to all four elements. Every single sovereign's element has kind of a hand in it in a way.
Yeah, precisely. That's exactly where I wanted to go with that.
Also, when you were talking about where it was, I kind of feel like, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but I kind of feel like that weird space that the moon occupies is kind of like a border realm between it technically, I feel like it would kind of be possible to get there from the mortal realm, but it's about as possible as it is to get to the Sky Kingdom. Technically, yes, if you can find a way to shoot up far enough and not just freeze or run out of air, then yeah, you'd probably be fine. But I feel like
without magic, it's about as difficult as getting to the moon.
Yes, exactly. It's about as hard as actually literally getting to the moon. But I feel like it inhabits this weird place, like this border realm between the other worlds and the overworld, the Sky Kingdom. Especially considering the connection that Rialta has to it, and the way that the otherworldly creatures like the Fey Lords and whatnot that reign there, it likely has that kind of like grounding connection. We're not grounding. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's not literally grounding; it's up in the sky. But you get what I mean.
The opposite of grounding, but that anchoring connection.
An anchor, yes. Because I don't know about you, but I kind of feel like the bone blood moon. I feel like that moon probably doesn't orbit; it just sits up in the sky, and that's just where it lives. Like the pearl, the original moon gets pulled across the sky, and that affects the waves. The sun gets pulled across the sky, leading to day and night. But I kind of feel like the bone moon, it doesn't like orbit around Anacra like one of the other spheres is pulled by the Titans. I feel like that thing was just kind of set there, and it's just like no matter what time of day, like when it's a really like clear day outside and it's in the right position, you can see the moon in broad daylight. It's like really faint and distant. I feel like it's like there's just always this pure white like moon.
It can't be always. Can't be always, because then no twins could be born on a moonless night.
Oh, okay. I mean, yeah, I guess that's important, I suppose. Yeah, you're right.
It would also
you're right. That's true. That's true. You know what? Yeah, you're true. That's true. Yeah, all right, that's true. You're right.
Question from chat. Bone Moon degaff about physics. Well, I mean, first off, Anacra kind of degaffs about physics because the world is in the middle of orbital physics aren't really a thing. You know, you've got this planet and this dome of stars, and there's a lot of things that are all a wizard did it instead of the laws of physics did it. I like the idea that the Bone Moon is operating under a completely different set of a complete. How about this? How about the Pearl always orbits on the same cycle, but its cycle is slow enough. The Pearl does not go through phases at all. The Pearl does not have phases. It's always like a full moon. But the Pearl is only about as bright as a really shiny star. It's not nearly as big as the moon. And it's not always visible because its cycle is very slow. The sun has a once a day cycle, but the Pearl has like a 30-day cycle or so. So it orbits super slowly. And so there, it's not always visible, but when it's visible, it's always its full shining self. But the Blood Moon does, or the Bone Moon does have a cycle that it goes through. So it waxes and wanes accordingly. That's my thought. How do you feel about that?
I mean, your way makes a lot more sense. I feel like our moons should act at least somewhat similarly to how moons should act.
If nothing else, because there's so much mythology that ties into phases of the moon and stuff like that.
I like this idea of just this celestial body that was just planted up in the sky, and no matter what, it was always there. And if ever it wasn't there, it'd be this really panicking kind of moment, you know? But I mean, you're right though, considering how we're having, the moon, the push and pull of it does affect the waves. I'm sure that even though it's not the Pearl Moon, the Bone Moon still would very likely affect, currents and things like that.
Well, we're not using gravitational physics for like any of our orbital crap. So we could still have it be that the Pearl affects the tides and the Bone Moon does not, because the Pearl is connected to the oceans magically, but the Bone Moon, even though it's tied to all four elements, is not. Like, we can just say, screw you, that's how this works.
You know what we could do, mate? Not to, and I like what you had described with the different cycles, but I'm wondering if we have the Bone Moon follow, since we already said that it has this connection to the four elements, like, well, through the four elements by having the different titans come together and make it happen. I'm wondering if this moon doesn't have like kind of a directional orbit, if that makes sense, where you would have a moonless night, because let's say, for instance, you were having a child born in the Northern Kingdoms. If the moon is in a position surrounding Anacra, where let's say it's the Northern Hemisphere versus the Southern Hemisphere versus hanging out somewhere in the equator, the moon itself kind of transitions around these cardinal directional points to where it's not always present in the sky, but it is always like there, if that makes sense. Like,
so it's like if our moon, has a specific orbit it follows, this moon's sort of like it looks like an electron orbit where it just it's not random, but it's erratic, and it takes scholars a lot of work to understand the way that it moves, and it moves between different stars in the sky and stuff. So it's on this like gyroscopic orbit that cycles around the whole planet. I like that.
I feel like yes, asterisks. And the only reason I'm saying asterisks is that someone might add us going like, hey, you guys, this literally, I know you're not a physics thing for this fantasy world of yours, but what you're describing is literally insane. And let me tell you why. So if that happens, we reserve the right to go, you're right, that's stupid, and let's actually fix that.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of the case with all Anacra lore, right?
Oh, yeah,
it's a continuous work in progress. So
absolutely.
Note to self, do an episode on werewolves.
All right.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about the moon quite a bit, which the moon exists because the One Flesh arrived. And the One Flesh is an end game level threat. Like, I would say that the One Flesh, it's strong enough that it takes all of Liban's time and attention to keep the damn thing under wraps. And it's a good thing that Titans are immortal, and Liban is capable of just continuously fighting without taking a break. So we're talking, it's easily equal to any infernal. It's a top tier threat that is currently on lockdown. Yeah,
absolutely.
The nice thing I feel about the One Flesh is that you can add aberrations to your campaign anywhere you want to in Anacra, because it exploded and left Ghibli bits all over the place, and those Ghibli bits grew and spawned and spread throughout the world. And anytime you meet any aberration, it is directly connected to the One Flesh. But it's not like, oh, one of them saw us, they all know we're here. It doesn't work. It's not that direct. It's not that one-to-one. No.
It probably has like a max range where it's kind of localized. Like you said, on some level, they all are connected and understand certain things and are following certain basic directives. But like you said, it's not like literally like one little slithering mass sees you and all of them will rush for you because they know exactly where you are. It's more like if a zombie howls, all the zombies in the immediate area will follow that howl. Something more along those lines.
You know what I want to compare it to? Ants. Because it seems like ants are, ants can come across as highly intelligent, because if there's any crack in your defense, any food you left behind, they will find it. But it's not because they're highly intelligent, it's because there are so many of them and they are relentless. They just push and push and push. They're like a force of nature. It's like water. Water just finds its way via gravity. So if there's any point of least resistance, it will find it. Again, it's almost mathematical, almost physics. Ants are the same way. They just send out scouts, and if they find something, they leave a chemical trail. There's enough of them, and they are relentless enough that they will find the cracks in your defenses. But they're not led by, they don't have a literal hive mind. They're just programmed to operate in a certain way. And they communicate via pheromones, and they leave behind scent trails. So
I was going to say, a lot of their stuff is they basically just have manuals saying, like, instead of having to talk about a lot of things, they just will see something or sense something. And they have this super complex, just like almost chart that says, hey, if this, now this. It's almost kind of like they're this weird organic program that is just constantly breaking through, like in a moment. Okay, let's go through this chain of events, and this is what this means. Okay, cool. Here's my directive now.
Right. They just launch enough drones operating under this basic logic that eventually they're going to get through. So if one aberration finds you, it's not like the hive mind knows you're there and it's going to form a strategy. But if you are somehow connected to a larger, I'm not going to say plan, because that's probably a little too complex, but they might be able to leave, I'm going to say psychic scent trails, where they don't literally communicate via pheromones, but more aberrations could be drawn to the area. It's not like they know, I've been called, I must go. It's more like, hey, why don't we go this way now? I don't know. It just seems like a really good idea to go that way, in that particular direction, to the tunnels beneath that particular village right now.
It's almost like radio frequencies, I feel like. Yeah, they have this connection to where it's almost like if you're leaving an open channel out that's just transmitting information. And if they're within range, they'll pick it up and know how to react to it. But it's not like literally they're calling you and going, hey, guys, everyone meet up at the corner store. We're going to make this, It's if you happen to kind of come within the range, or if you go through certain areas, you'll pick it up naturally. Or not you, the aberration will. Indeed. I also like the idea with what we've set up with the One Flesh. You'd be able to run games in Anacra where you could totally do, again, you could keep it as fantasy or sci-fi as you want, but you could have this very D&D Invasion of the Body Snatchers kind of scenario where you have these either literal zombies or zombie-like people that have been implanted by this or even something like like Slither, or one of those horror movies that have been coming out recently where they have like an invasion plot. You could literally have, like, either on a low or high scale, this very weird either shapeshiftery invasion kind of thing that's happening behind the scenes, very Skrulls from Marvel, or like doppelgangers, things like that.
Or the Thing, right? Like
or the Thing. Yeah, that's way in line with the One Flesh, something like the Thing.
The One Flesh doesn't add laser guns and spaceships to your campaign, but it definitely adds those elements of sci-fi horror. It makes it easy for you to put weird shit that doesn't really fit in anywhere else as needed.
Also, for those of you who may be among us, you could easily run something along those lines, even though it can be a bit sus at times.
Thoras is sus. Actually, no, let's be honest. Alan O'Dale is sus as hell.
Alan O'Dale is sus.
All right, so
I saw Alan O'Dale vent. We got to vote him out.
Wasn't me. All right, so the Earth, a couple things from chat. The Earth does have some pseudo-moons, which are basically asteroids that trail the Earth in its orbit in a way that looks like a half orbit when viewed from Earth. Maybe the Demon Bone Moon is something similar to that. It could be. I want the moon to have, cycles that are predictable, but don't follow the exact patterns of our planet's orbit. But I don't know enough about the physics to come up with the exact. It's like how when what's his name? The Game of Thrones guy. Why am I George R. R. Martin?
Really? I would say the Game of Thrones guy. There's a lot of people in Game of Thrones.
Yeah, no, George R. R. Martin. He wanted a world where the seasons last for years. He didn't start with an orbital model. He started with, in this world, the seasons last for years. Somebody really smart came up with an orbital model that actually works. But again, you have to remember that in Anacra, the entire universe, the Earth is literally at the center of the universe. The sun goes around the Earth. It's like a pre-Copernican model of space-time. And it's all inside this dome and, all this other stuff.
The more you talk about it, the more sus it seems.
It's magic, dude. It's magic. It was literally designed this way via magic.
It's beautiful. Actually, one of the things that I was thinking in a way, and in that similar vein, was the moon literally slipping between the four kingdoms. And so rather than having it like necessarily path a certain way, my thought was and it doesn't have to be this way, but my kind of thought for it was that it literally will slip through like one realm and then come out the other. So that's why it'll appear in these cardinal directions at different times, but it's not actually moving through the sky like a normal moon that is like literally circling and it's almost like blinking around, if that makes sense. That's
wonder if
kind of what I was thinking.
So the phases of the moon are caused by, shadows, but that's not how our orbital system works. So what if our moon phases are caused by literal phasing, where the moon passes through the four kingdoms? So if you go to the other world, right? So if it's if it's a new moon and you go to the other world, it's a full moon there. Or something along those lines.
You just blew my mind, because not only is that hilarious, but it makes a lot of sense for what we have in canon. I love it.
All right, so there's two aspects to this. One is the whole is the moon visible thing. So when the moon is not visible, either it's on the other side of the planet, assuming we have a round planet, which we've been going under those assumptions, or it's in the underworld. So you've got is it on the horizon or not? And that's somewhere between orbital, just going on the planet being round. And then the other aspect of it is the phases of the moon, and that's its polarity between the mortal world and the other world.
So, mate, what we have here is that we have no moon or new moon status is like underworld. And then we have like rising up and into the mortal realm. We have the waxing, and then we have in the sky kingdom the full moon, and then we have the waning moon in the other world. So it moves through the four kingdoms.
Well,
that's
my thought was it has two separate cycles, because if the moon is a waxing crescent in the real world, it's a waxing crescent, and I believe it's a waxing crescent no matter where you are in the world, and that waxing crescent goes up and it goes back down. So, and then it goes up and it goes back down again, but it's waxing, so now it's a little bit larger, right? So that's a separate cycle. You've got the orbital cycle of where is it in the sky, and then you've got the phase cycle of how much of it do you see. So my thought is those are two different things. And the orbital cycle is movement between the underworld and the overworld, the sky kingdom.
Okay. So
that's one cycle. And then the other cycle is phasing between the mortal world and the other world. So that way, if it's a waxing crescent, that means that it is mostly in the other world, but it's starting to shift into our world.
Yeah.
And if you don't see it, it's because it's currently passing through the underworld on its way back to the Sky Kingdom.
So we're almost in a way kind of like looking at it on like two different axes or planes, and based off of where it is along those two different charts is what you're going to see.
Right.
Whether it is transitioning from up and down under to overworld, and then through mortal realm to otherworld.
Right. Now, there is one problem with this, as OW Bolo brings up, is that we are still playing with the assumption that the mortal world is round. So the exact logic of how it enters and exits the underworld That's spitballing at this point, and I don't have a strong mechanic on how it works. Because to answer your question, the underworld is not Australia right now. We do have the mortal world as being a sphere. So that's a cool idea I had that I have no idea how it works yet.
Well, again, what I kind of see for that is that just like with the other world, you can find these points. These how do we describe them? Not just like fairy gardens, but what did we
Crossing
call
points?
for that? Crossing points. We called them crossing points. So we have these crossing points that, yes, it could literally be that you walk through a Stonehenge and then you were in the mortal realm one moment and now you're in the other worlds, or that there's like we said, there's a beam of light coming down, from the sky, and you step into it, you speak a chant, and then when the beam of light rescinds, you are pulled with it up into the sky kingdom. We have things like that a lot, but I also feel like much like how there's that in between foggy goop or starless expanse, either the astral or the ethereal plane that borders all these worlds. I kind of feel like what we're describing is less like, oh no, the moon's crashing into Australia. It made it. Okay, and now it's popping back up through, instead of it literally smashing into the world and kind of coming out, it's more like, oh, you see it, and as it's moving, it slips through. Oh, it's in the underworld now. It's almost kind of like it itself has its own crossing points that it intersects with, but you can tell based off where it is, it either could be legends or it could be actual fact that that's where it is during its cycle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, let's because it literally is right now in a wizard did it territory until we understand it better. Let's make it so that it's people believe it passes through the underworld, but for now we're just going to say it is on an orbital cycle of our round planet until we think of a cool way for that to work. But let's
shifting through crossing points.
Right. But then there's a question of when it shifts through a crossing point into the underworld, so our real moon, someone can see the moon at all times because it goes around the planet. And when it goes over the horizon, it's just orbiting, and now it's, rising for somebody else.
Yes.
Ostensibly under this system, when the moon enters the underworld, nobody would see it. And so there's a question of like, does it literally land somewhere and then go into the earth, or does it cross a crossing point somewhere in the sky and enter the underworld, and then for that period of time is it invisible to everybody?
That's what my thought was. I think crashing into the earth is I think that's a little silly.
Someone should do that. Someone should have a setting where that literally happens. It's very Egyptian mythology.
I mean, here's the thing, Nate. What I could see happen is that, like how we talked about, there's literally caverns that if you keep going deeper and deeper and deeper into the mortal realm, you'll eventually pass through into the underworld. We could literally have, an area very similar to like the Grand Canyon, where the moon literally carves into the earth, or over time it has created this canyon by carving into the earth, and then it descends down to Goblin Town. We could have something like that. I think that's a bit much, because where would we put that? Also, secondarily, which would kind of fix our whole it crashed in the earth plan, it is a moon. It has connection to Liban and to Rialta. This moon literally could just dip into the endless ocean. It could go.
That's true.
Into the
That's true. It would totally
land the water.
It would totally land in the ocean.
To where it's not crashing into the earth, but it just slips into the water, especially into the vast, endless oceans that separate the continents, where no one really can. Once it gets there, you can't really see it that well anyway. It could literally be doing that. And it has almost this weird, like if you have the globe, it has this weird little section where it'll kind of come in, come out, and then do this little, like you talk about the whole atom thing, where it just comes in out of the oceans. And literally you'll have sailors that are just like, doing their thing. They're a little bit out too far one time, and then just there's this rumbling from beneath, a whirlpool happens, and then just this enormous moon just,
imagine. All right, so I like this, by the way. I like the idea of it literally sinking into the ocean. I would still need like a little orb with some tracks around it to make sure that everyone sees the moon, because if it just does this, then no one on this side of the planet is going to see the moon at all. I'm totally, in terms of the feel of Anacra, I'm here for the moon literally going underwater. I'm also here for some poor sailor like literally running aground on the moon and
hey, how long have you been here on the moon? Well, actually, about 5 years ago, I was a fisherman, and then I took a moon to the knee, and now here I am.
Well, because
I've been here for a long time.
Some wild hunt fae could build their whole hunting lodge out of ships, right? Like that's just weird and cool, and I'm here for it.
Well, now we just stumbled into how we're doing this, which is hilarious.
Okay, let's continue to iterate on this model. The phases of the moon are definitely caused by the degree to which it's in the mortal versus the other world. Like we're gonna go ahead. Yeah, so we're definitely going with that. And the orbit, we're thinking it passes literally into the ocean, into the underworld. We will continue to iterate on that. I like it. Anything else? We've run out of time. Anything else about the One Flesh and aberrations?
I would say final thoughts on what we covered. Lebon is a boss, and I hope they're happy where they are. Just eternally tearing into the One Flesh. The One Flesh is a intense thing that just is deep within covering, but is secretive within Anacra.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking forward to discussing Tamrian and elves.
Yes. I think my last thing, since it's sort of a campaign forward, we talked about how you can use aberrations in an Anacra campaign. Let's talk about very briefly, and then we'll go.
Very
Great Old One Pact Warlocks. So I think the idea with, like, if you make a pact with Uzhul might literally write a contract or say, I will give you my power in exchange for you enacting my will upon the mortal world. The One Flesh doesn't work like that. It's almost, again, it's unconscious on the One Flesh's part. So a One Flesh, Great Old One Pact Warlock has found a way or been infused with One Flesh DNA, or has some other unconscious connection, or performed a rite. But I believe they've actually mutated in some way to be able to channel those powers. And they sort of tap into this unconscious will. So it's not like the One Flesh is sitting over their shoulder saying, hey, do this, hey, do that. It's more like they just get weird instinctual urges. And there's this constant pressure that may turn them into part of the One Flesh's non-plan. But again, it's all very unconscious, spooky dreams, that kind of stuff.
Just, I know, final thing. Yes, but going along with what you're saying, I do have this idea of, I know you said it's not literally hanging over your shoulder telling you things, but again, from like Dragon Prince, there was that little worm from the great old, elven being that literally was just like in the ear of I don't want to do too much spoiler stuff for anyone who haven't seen it, but basically, I think there literally could be a sense where if this upstart warlock had tried to contact a being or gotten to something a little bit more than it could chew, and literally was able to either summon or locate a being that would either just crawl into its ear or be hanging out invisibly, like literally just nestled up somewhere.
Yeah.
You have this old force, whether it's whispering or implanting visions and formulas and ideas into your brain.
That's sort of the thing with the One Flesh, right? It itself will not talk to you, but its offshoots can talk to you. They could be completely sentient. They could have evil plans. If you need an embodiment of the One Flesh, if you need the voice of the One Flesh, if you need that to be like a powerful force, create an intermediary, create some sort of not an avatar, but a spawn of the One Flesh to serve that role. An avatar.
Spawn is better, but avatar's close.
Yeah, it's close, right? It's not like a direct manifestation of it, but it is definitely a part of its will and a part of its sentience.
The elder brains that the mind flayers worship would be as close as we probably get, or even maybe like an aboleth would be very close to being, or even like the Kraken would be close to like avatars, like big, great old beings that are connected to this weird force. But yeah,
agreed.
Absolutely. Great job, mate. This was really cool.
Yeah. Thank you, chat, for hanging out. Don't forget, today our new show premieres in 4 hours. Coriander, which is a totally new adventure on the Casters and Casters channel. If you're watching this live, if not, you can go to our YouTube to watch old episodes, because that will be a thing soon. Super excited about that. You'll see Matt and myself there, as well as some other awesome guests. Thanks again to everyone in our community for sticking around with us as we go through all these talks. Thanks to everyone in chat. Thanks to everyone listening in the future. Farewell and bye, I guess.
We need a better sign off. Bye.
We do. We need a signature thing. We'll come up with that later. Bye. Oh, yeah. We're not clear because I pressed the wrong button.